The Crucible base hung in orbit like a jagged crown of steel, circling a dying red star. Its atmosphere was heavy with dread, not because of the heat or radiation the station's shields held firm, but because of the whispers that traveled through every corridor. The quota was about to be announced. Every cadet in the galaxy knew the word. The quota wasn't a simple test. It was the test. Beneath the base's central dome, where the light of the collapsing star bled crimson across the arena floor, thousands of recruits stood in rigid silence. Dozens of species scaled, feathered, furred, and silicon-bodied waited for the counselors to speak. Their bodies twitched with anxiety, mandibles clicking, claws scratching at armored plates. They knew what was coming. The quota, the same task that had broken empires and humbled warlords. The silence cracked when the lead counselor, a being of molten crystal with a voice like grinding stone, raised his staff. The sound echoed, chilling in its finality. "Recruits of the galaxy," the counselor intoned, "you stand at the beginning of the trial of legends. You will face what every species before you has faced, the quota." The words seemed to deepen the red light around them, as though the dying star itself flared in warning. You will harvest, refine, and deliver 10,000 units of stellar alloy from the crucible fields below. Only when the quota is met will your trial be complete. Fail and your name is forgotten here. A ripple of dread rolled through the arena. The cadets knew the truth. Most species required years to reach the quota, some decades. It wasn't simply a measure of strength, it was a measure of persistence, endurance, and the ability to work until hope itself withered. An insectoid cadet hissed under his breath, his carapace clattering. "It took my hive 43 cycles. Half of us didn't return." A scaled reptilian cadet bared his teeth in a grim smile. "My brood finished in a decade. That is the record. None faster." They looked around with pride and nervousness, measuring themselves against each other, and then their eyes fell on the human. Cadet Jackson Reeves stood near the back, hands in his pockets, shoulders loose as though he were waiting for a bus instead of a trial. His uniform was standard issue, but already scuffed and worn, and instead of a data pad, he carried an old paper notebook tucked under his arm. He didn't shift nervously like the others. He didn't sneer or posture. He smirked. When the counselor finished the decree, when the silence returned, and the cadets stood crushed under the weight of what had been demanded, Jackson broke it with, for casual words. "So, by Monday then." The arena erupted. Alien voices boomed, hissed, and screeched in unison. Some bent over laughing, others clicked their tongues in mockery, still others spat insults. A massive avian cadet nearly doubled over, feathers shaking with mirth. The insectoid Trek hissed sharp enough to echo, "Primate won't last a rotation." The reptilian Voker snarled, "My kind spent a decade on ours. Your bones will break before the first crate is filled." Even the counselors exchanged low murmurs, unimpressed by the human's bravado. The laughter swelled until it was deafening, until the dome itself seemed to shake with derision. But Jackson didn't flinch. He flipped open his notebook, clicked a battered pen, and started scribbling something down while the laughter rolled around him like thunder. He didn't even look up. The sound of his pen scratching paper, such an archaic sound, cut through the cacophony like a blade. The aliens laughed harder, mistaking calm for stupidity. But a few, just a few, noticed something different. They noticed the steady movements of his hand, the way he didn't argue, the way he didn't bother defending himself. And they felt unease, because if a human was joking in the face of the quota, maybe he wasn't joking at all. The dying star pulsed outside the dome, as if marking the moment. The trial of legends had begun, and the galaxy was about to learn what a deadline meant to a human. The laughter didn't fade quickly. It rolled across the crucible's central dome like a storm, echoing off steel walls and reverberating in the bones of every cadet. The alien recruits laughed because it was easier than facing the truth, because If they didn't laugh, they might have to admit the human's words had unsettled them. Jackson Reeve didn't look up. He was still writing. The scratch of pen on paper sounded unnatural here. In a hall filled with data pads, holographic slates, and memory crystals. The sound seemed out of place, primitive even, but it carried. It cut through the chorus of alien voices until cadets began to notice. Trek, the insectoid, clattered forward on spindly legs, his eyes glittering in the crimson light of the dying star above. His mandibles clicked in amusement as he leaned close to peer at the human. "You think this is a jest, primate?" His voice was a hiss, sharp as broken glass. "Your kind still burns dead trees for warmth. The quota will break you in half before your second sun rises." Jackson didn't reply. He flipped the page and kept writing, his pencil rasping steadily. The reptilian voker slithered closer, scales scraping against the floor. Taller than Jackson by a head, his muscles rippled beneath emerald skin. He let out a low growl that made smaller cadets shrink away. "My brood spent a decade here," he snarled, "and half of us did not live to see the end. Do you know why, human? Because the quota is not a task, it is a war, and you are already dead." He bared his fangs in a cruel grin, expecting fear, expecting trembling. But the human only turned one page further, muttered something under his breath, and drew a small map in the corner of the notebook. The silence that followed was worse than laughter. Cadets shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. Why wasn't he reacting? Why wasn't he defending himself? The avian cadet, feathers iridescent in the crimson light, finally spoke. His voice was low, amused, but his eyes never left Jackson's hand as it moved across the page. "Look at him. He doesn't even argue. Either he is a fool, or he already knows something we don't." That whisper traveled faster than laughter. Suspicion replaced amusement. The insectoid's mandibles stilled. The reptilian's grin faltered. Even Vokar's yellow eyes narrowed, as if searching for weakness, but found none. Jackson finished his note, closed the book with a quiet snap, and finally raised his head. His eyes were calm, level, and when they swept the room, the recruits felt a sudden chill despite the sweltering heat of the crucible base. "You're all very loud," Jackson said simply, tucking the notebook under his arm. His voice wasn't raised, wasn't commanding, but it cut through the dome like a blade. "Maybe that's why it takes you years." The laughter that followed was nervous this time, short, uneven, and then the counselor's staff struck the ground again, ending the murmurs. "Recruits," the crystalline being thundered, "your tasks begin now. Shuttles wait to deliver you to the crucible fields. Your time starts today." The doors to the hangar groaned open, and the scent of scorched metal and ionized dust wafted in. Cadets surged forward, their squads shouting orders, activating drones, and broadcasting strategy. Updates to one another. Metal feet clanged, wings rustled, and claws scraped. The arena emptied in a flood of bodies as each species rushed to prove themselves. But Jackson didn't rush. He stood still as the crowd streamed around him, pulling a small tool pouch from his belt and checking it with methodical precision. No drones, no machines, no squads, just hand tools and a small scanner. When the last squad had departed, Jackson finally moved. Slowly, calmly, he slung the pack over his shoulder, flipped open his notebook again, and muttered, "All right, let's get this done." And as he stepped through the doors, into the blinding light of the crucible fields, a few cadets, just a few, found themselves staring after him. They had mocked him, ridiculed him, called him fool, but in the pit of their stomachs, a thought they dared not voice began to grow. What if the human wasn't joking? The crucible field stretched out like the scarred surface of a nightmare planet. Jagged mountains of ore rose like teeth from the ground, glowing faintly in the red light of the dying star overhead. Dust storms swirled between the peaks, carrying flecks of metal that cut into exposed skin, like glass shards. Radiation monitors chirped steadily, warning of doses that would sicken even hardened veterans. For centuries, the Crucible fields had broken cadets, and now they would break more. Alien squads poured out of the shuttles in perfect formation. Their drones hummed to life, unfolding like mechanical insects, wings glittering as they scanned the terrain. Officers barked orders into comms data, flickering with tactical overlays. Each squad looked like an army marching to war, and in the middle of this chaos, Jackson Reeves stepped down the shuttle ramp with a tool pouch slung over his shoulder and a battered notebook in his hand. No drones, no squad, no backup, just him. "Look at that," Trek hissed from a nearby ledge, his mandibles clattering as he pointed with a claw. "He comes to a battlefield with a toy kit." Voker, the reptilian, rumbled in amusement, his scaled tail sweeping the dust. "He'll be bones in the sand by sundown." But Jackson didn't seem to hear them. Or maybe he just didn't care. He pulled a small handheld scanner from his pouch, adjusted a cracked dial, and swept it across the jagged ground. The device screeched with interference, then steadied, displaying a faint ping. Jackson nodded, pulled a stub of chalk from his pocket, and marked an X on the rock. The aliens stared in disbelief, while their drones spun algorithms and mapped hundreds of data points. The human was drawing on rocks, and then he pulled out a pickaxe. The sound rang out sharp and clear. Clang, clang, clang. Each strike threw sparks into the red dust. Each strike sent a jarring echo bouncing off the mountains, while squads debated resource distribution and filed requests for refinery units. Jackson simply started digging. Clang, clang, clang. The rhythm carried, steady and relentless, like the ticking of a clock that none of the other species had ever cared to hear. By midday, alien squads were still calibrating their drones, their ore haulers idling uselessly. Commanders argued over which vein was richest, wasting hours in committee squabbles. And Jackson, he had already carved open an ore vein, with brute force, his gloves torn, his shoulders straining as he hauled glowing chunks of alloy into a crate. His scanner beeped, confirming purity levels most squads wouldn't achieve until their machines were operational. A group of cadets gathered on a ridge above, watching in silence now. "He's doing it by hand," one whispered, mandibles twitching nervously. "He'll burn out. He has to. Then why can't I look away?" As the red star dimmed into evening, squads were still in disarray. Equipment failures, disagreements, inefficiencies, all slowed their progress. But in the fading light, a single human trudged back toward the hangar, dragging behind him a crate stacked with gleaming alloy. His boots sank deep into the dust, his shoulders bowed, but his pace never faltered. The overseers scanned the load, their crystalline eyes flickering in confusion. The numbers were correct. The human had produced more in his first cycle than entire squads combined. When word spread, it didn't come with laughter this time. It came with silence, the kind of silence that hinted at fear. From the shadows of the Crucible fields, Commander Threx of the Vakari watched with his arms crossed, his mandibles clicking in slow rhythm. He had mocked the human earlier, like the others, but now, his gaze lingered. There was no strategy here, no advanced technology, no clever alien secret. There was only sweat, blood, and the unrelenting rhythm of a man who refused to stop. Clang, clang, clang. By the end of the first night, the quota no longer seemed like a joke. It seemed like a deadline. The second dawn over the Crucible fields was harsh and merciless. The dying star flared brighter than it had in centuries, scorching the jagged terrain in waves of crimson heat. Radiation alarms howled, and even the toughest cadets winced as their suits struggled to compensate. Already, cracks were forming. The insectoid hive squad argued over priority veins, their drones colliding mid-air in bursts of sparks as competing programming loops crashed. The reptilian broodlings complained of exhaustion, their scales flaking under the constant heat. The avian squad's wings drooped, feathers blackened by dust storms dot everywhere. The quota was doing its work, grinding down the overconfident, wearing out the stubborn, and humbling the proud. But not the human. Jackson Reeve was already waist-deep in another ore vein, his helmet lamp cutting through the choking dust. His gloves were shredded, his palms raw and blistered, but his grip on the pickaxe never faltered. Clang dot clang dot clang dot, the sound carried again, steady and relentless. When squads stumbled past, dragging malfunctioning machinery behind them, they would see him bent over his work, muscles straining, shirt plastered to his back with sweat. His veins bulged, his jaw was set, and his eyes never wavered from the rock in front of him. It was unnerving. "He hasn't stopped," a cadet muttered, watching from a ridge. "Does he even sleep?" "He can't keep this up," another said, but their voice lacked conviction. By mid-cycle, overseers began recording statistics. Drone output was down across the board, disputes were slowing shipments, and several squads had already requested time extensions. The quota clock ticked mercilessly forward, indifferent to their excuses. Then came the humans' report. Jackson dragged 2 crates into the hangar by hand, boots grinding trenches into the dust. He was coughing hard, his suit scorched at the seams, and his breath rattled in his chest. But when the overseers scanned the load, their eyes flickered in disbelief. The human had harvested, refined, and delivered more alloy in 2 days than some species had managed in 2 months. The whispers grew louder. Insectoid cadets hissed among themselves, trying to explain it away as luck. Reptilians spat, insisting he would collapse by the 3rd day. Avians muttered that he must be using hidden machinery, but when they sent drones to spy, they only found him alone, working by hand in the dust. His notebook open beside him. He had drawn crude maps, scrawled notes, and marked veins with chalk and string. Primitive, absurd, and devastatingly effective. That night, as the star bled low across the horizon, Jackson sat against a rock, chest heaving, face streaked with grime. He pulled out a thermos, drank the last of his cold coffee, and without hesitation picked up his pickaxe again. He didn't wait for dawn. The sound of his strikes echoed through the dark fields, carrying 2 alien camps where cadets lay in their tents, wide awake and restless. Dot clang dot clang dot clang dot. They couldn't escape it. Even in their dreams, the sound haunted them. A reminder, a warning. By the end of the 3rd day, it was no longer mockery that followed Jackson Reeve. It was fear, because where alien empires faltered under their own weight, where drones broke, and officers argued, the human did the one thing none of them understood. He kept going, no matter the pain, no matter the exhaustion, no matter the cost. The grind that broke civilizations only made him dig deeper, and as the overseers marked his growing tally on their charts, whispers spread across the crucible fields like wildfire. The human doesn't stop. By the 5th cycle, the crucible fields had turned into a graveyard of ambition. Collapsed drones lay half buried in dust, their wings twisted and lifeless. Cadets limped back to their camps with scorched armor, their eyes hollow with fatigue. Entire squads were already out of contention, their quota tallies so far behind that whispers of failure circled like carrion birds. And yet, in the heart of that ruin, one sound still carried clang. Clang clang. Jackson Reeve's pickaxe bit into another vein, sparks showering his torn gloves. His forearms were a lattice of raw blisters. Radiation burns marked his neck where his suit had split. Every breath rattled like broken glass in his lungs. He should have collapsed days ago. Any other species would have. Instead, he dragged another glowing slab of alloy into a crate, teeth clenched, eyes blazing. Above, squads that had once mocked him now stood silent on the ridges, watching. Their own quotas lagged so far behind that even envy had turned to something darker. Disbelief. He can't keep going. One cadet muttered, but the words sounded hollow. Then why is he? Another whispered back. By midday, Jackson staggered into the hangar, hauling 2 crates behind him. His legs shook with every step, his shoulders hunched as if bearing the weight of the star itself. He collapsed to one knee, coughing violently into his elbow. For a moment, it seemed he might not rise again. The overseers exchanged glances. One moved forward, ready to declare him unfit for continuation, and then Jackson slammed his hand against the crate, forcing the scanner online. The display blinked green. Shipment valid. His voice was hoarse, cracked with exhaustion, but it carried. Still on schedule. The hangar fell silent. At the back of the chamber, Commander Threx of the Vakari leaned forward, mandibles clicking. The drill officer had spent his career mocking humans too fragile, too chaotic, too primitive. He had called them a transient mistake of evolution. But the human before him had filled an entire hangar with neatly stacked crates, each tagged, sealed, and ready for delivery. Threx walked down the ramp slowly, the echo of his claws sharp against the deck. He stopped in front of Jackson, towering over him, alien eyes gleaming in the crimson light. "You should be dead," Threx said at last. His voice was low, dangerous, carrying across the chamber. No human should withstand this long. No human should deliver this much. Jackson, still on one knee, lifted his head. His face was pale, sweat dripping into the dust, but his grin was there, tired, defiant, unyielding. "Guess I missed the part," he rasped, where impossible meant stop. The silence that followed was suffocating. The reptilian cadets shifted, uneasily. The insectoids clicked their mandibles in agitation. Even the avians rustled their wings nervously, because in that single moment, they realized something none of them wanted to admit. The quota wasn't breaking the human. The human was breaking the quota by nightfall. Jackson was back in the fields, staggering through dust storms, with another crate strapped to his back. His body was failing. Anyone could see it. But his will only grew sharper, with every strike. Clang. Clang. Every blow of his pickaxe was a countdown. Not toward his collapse, but toward the inevitable moment when the galaxy would be forced to admit a truth it had long forgotten. Humans didn't measure their limits the way others did. They measured them in deadlines, and Jackson Reeve was right on schedule. The 7th dawn rose blood-red over the crucible fields. Dust storms clawed at the jagged ridges, hurling shards of metal through the air like razors. Radiation alarms screamed so loud they had become meaningless background noise. The fields were empty now. Most cadets had retreated to their camps, broken and beaten, their quotas hopelessly behind. Only one figure still moved in the wasteland. Jackson Reeve. He dragged a crate behind him, every step a war. His suit was in tatters, scorched through at the seams. Bandages crisscrossed his arms and torso, already seeping through with blood. His breath rasped loud in his helmet, each inhale a battle, each exhale a promise. He should have collapsed days ago. He should have died. But somehow, impossibly, he kept moving. Up on a ridge, alien cadets gathered in silence. There was no mockery anymore, no laughter, no sneers. Their eyes followed the human's staggering form with something darker fear. "He's still going," one whispered, as if saying it aloud might make it less real. "Why? He has nothing left, because he doesn't know how to stop." The crate carved a deep trail in the dust as Jackson hauled it, inch by inch, toward the hangar. His lips moved silently, counting, whispering numbers to himself. His body had been reduced to machine-like motions, powered not by strength but by something more dangerous, refusal. When he finally crossed the threshold into the docking bay, the hangar fell into stunned silence. Hundreds of cadets froze in place, watching the broken figure dragging alloy behind him. The crate hit the deck with a metallic thunder that seemed to shake the entire crucible. Jackson staggered, nearly falling. His knees buckled. For a heartbeat, everyone thought it was over. but with a guttural growl, he forced himself upright, stumbled to the control console, and slammed his palm against the scanner. The machine beeped once. The lights blinked green. Quota completed. The silence that followed was total. For the first time in living memory, a species had completed the quota in less than a year, and the human had done it in 7 days. Commander Threx stepped forward from the shadows. His mandibles parted in disbelief. He stared at the blinking green display, then at the human swaying on his feet. "This is impossible," Threx whispered, his voice raw. Jackson's head lolled forward. His face was pale, streaked with grime, his lips split and bleeding. And yet, as he forced his eyes open, there was a glint. They're tired, defiant, triumphant. He gave a weak, rasping laugh. Monday, right on time. The cadets erupted not in laughter, but in gasps, in disbelieving cries. Some shouted denial, others whispered prayers, and still others simply stared, wide-eyed and silent, as if the foundation of their reality had just cracked. The overseers, crystalline and ancient, checked the numbers again and again, their glowing cores flickering in shock. There was no mistake. The human had done it. On the far side of the bay, an avian cadet whispered words that would ripple across the galaxy. The quota didn't break him. He broke the quota. Jackson finally sank to his knees, body trembling, chest heaving. His eyes fluttered closed, but the faintest of smiles lingered on his face. He had no strength left, but he didn't need it anymore. The work was done. The galaxy had witnessed the impossible, and for the first time in countless cycles, fear of humanity stirred again in alien hearts. The docking bay lights glared down like judgment itself. Cadets crowded the edges of the chamber, whispering, staring, too stunned to move. The final crate still sat in the scanner's cradle, glowing faintly with processed alloy, its green confirmation light steady and undeniable. Jackson Reeve knelt on the deck, swaying, his body shaking from exhaustion. His breaths rattled like rusted machinery. Every inch of him was broken, bandaged, bruised, blistered, yet the faintest trace of a smile lingered on his face. Into the silence, the counselors entered. They descended from the observation platform in a slow procession, their crystalline forms blazing in the red light of the dying star. The air itself seemed to grow heavy under their presence. These were beings who had judged emperors, who had watched civilizations rise and fall. They had seen pride, strength, arrogance, but they had never seen this. The lead counselor raised his staff. The sound reverberated through the bay, silencing even the whispers. Cadet Jackson Reeve of Earth. The counselor intoned, voice grinding like stone. "Step forward." Jackson forced himself upright. His knees buckled, his vision swam, but he moved. Step by staggering step, he crossed the deck until he stood barely before the crystalline giants. The counselor tilted his head, light flickering inside his translucent frame. "Explain," he said simply. "How did you achieve the quota in 7 cycles? What hidden machinery did you deploy? What trick of your people has been concealed from us?" The chamber held its breath. Every cadet leaned forward, eyes wide. They wanted to know too. They needed to know. Jackson blinked, swayed, then dropped his battered toolkit onto the floor with a heavy clang. A cracked pickaxe, a handheld scanner, a chalk stub, and his ragged notebook spilled across the deck. Primitive tools. Laughable by galactic standards. "That's it," Jackson rasped, his voice rough as gravel. The counselor's light flickered in confusion. "Impossible." "No one," Jackson interrupted, his words ragged but steady. "Didn't wait for orders. Didn't wait for committees. Didn't wait for perfect conditions. He coughed, blood flecking his lip. "Did the work." The words landed like a detonation. Cadets shifted uneasily, mandibles twitching, wings rustling, scales scraping. They looked from the primitive tools on the deck to the completed quota tally flashing overhead. There was no trick, no secret, no hidden human advantage. It was worse than that. The human had done it, through sheer refusal to stop, Commander. Threx stepped forward, his mandibles clattering softly. For once, there was no mockery in his voice, only something deeper, respect and fear. I watched you, Threx said, low and measured. I thought you would break, that the fields would devour you like they have devoured all before. But you never stopped. Why, human? Why keep going when your body was ash and your spirit bled? Jackson lifted his head, meeting the Vakari's alien eyes. His own were bloodshot, rimmed with exhaustion, but burning with something ancient and dangerous. Because, Jackson said, voice steady now, where I come from, if you stop, you die. And if something has to be done, it gets done. Deadline or not. The silence that followed was suffocating. The counselors flickered among themselves, light shifting like a storm inside crystal. None of them spoke. None of them could. Finally, the lead counselor lowered his staff. His voice was quieter now, but heavier, as though acknowledging something he had not wished to see. Then, it is true, he said. Humans do not endure because they are the strongest, nor the fastest, nor the most advanced. They endure because they do not stop. The words rippled through the chamber, through every cadet, through every officer, and for the first time in centuries, the galaxy trembled not before the quota, but before the species that had conquered it in a single week. And Jackson Reeve, swaying on his feet, whispered the final nail in their certainty. By Monday, he said with a broken grin, just like I said. The cadets stared. The counselors burned brighter, and the galaxy's fear of humanity was reborn. The news did not travel. It detonated within hours. Whispers of the impossible feat had left Crucible Base. Within days, the whispers became reports, and within a week, the reports became fear. Across the galaxy's great academies, instructors replayed the surveillance feeds, alone humans staggering through dust storms, hauling crates as if carrying his own coffin, refusing to stop, even as his body failed him. They saw him collapse, rise again, collapse, rise again, finally drag the final crate across the hangar floor. Every broadcast ended the same way. The green light flashing quota completed, and the broken human whispering, by Monday, entire species shuddered. The reptilians, who prided themselves on endurance, fell silent in their training pits. The insectoids, who had always claimed tireless persistence, twitched nervously at the sight of a man who had outlasted them all, with nothing but blistered hands. The avians, who believed themselves unmatched in discipline, rustled their feathers uneasily at the image of Jackson grinning through bloodied lips, daring the impossible and finishing it anyway. The council chambers burned with arguments. Some cried fraud, others demanded the crucible be shut down. But the crystalline overseers cold, incorruptibly played the raw data again and again. The numbers did not lie. For the first time in centuries, the quota had not merely been met. It had been obliterated by a single human. On Crucible Base, Jackson lay in the infirmary, his body a patchwork of bandages, 4 lines, and medical rigs. He should have been unconscious. He should have been recovering. Instead, he was awake, staring at the ceiling with tired eyes, as officers and cadets filed past the glass observation wall. They came not to mock him anymore, nor even to gawk. They came because something in them needed to see him, to see the human who had broken their certainty. Commander Threx stood at the foot of the glass, mandibles clicking softly. He had spent his life sneering at humans. Now he found himself whispering words he never thought he would speak. They'll fear you now, Threx said quietly. Your kind will remember why the galaxy once marked Earth as off-limits. Jackson turned his head slowly, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. But his grin, small, defiant, was still there. Good, he rasped. Maybe they'll stop underestimating us. The fear spread faster than the truth. In border colonies, alien governors whispered, if one human can do this, What could 1,000 do? In military fleets, admirals asked if they treat quotas like deadlines. What happens when they treat war like I? And in the dark corners of the galaxy, where old records lay forgotten, archivists uncovered a chilling reminder. This was not the first time humanity had been underestimated, and it had never ended well for those who tried. Back on Crucible Base, as night settled over the wasteland, cadets whispered the story to one another around dim fire pits. Most species needed years to meet the quota, they said. The human did it in 7 days. And then the voice would drop lower, carrying the weight of myth. By Monday, the words became more than a boast, more than a deadline. They became a warning that echoed across the stars, turning every careless laugh, every smug dismissal of Earth into a shiver of doubt. Because if one broken human cadet could shatter the impossible in a week, then what could humanity do if it truly set its will against the galaxy? The answer came in whispers, in fear, in silence. Humans don't stop. They finish.